In 1999, it was wintertime. It was cold. In Colorado, we get snow. And I was going down to the Kingdom Hall for over a year at this point. God had opened a door, an amazing door, where the elder who led the book study had invited me to come and sit in and see, what it's like to be a Jehovah's Witness and what they teach. I wasn't doing the regular book studies with them. How many of you think that's kind of odd for an elder of a book study to invite somebody in who's not doing a book study to come to the meetings and watch what's going on? It was an amazing miracle that God had even given him a heart to do that. And I had a little bit of a study with him, not an official a Bible study as they call it, with him and his wife. I had actually met them through another whole set of circumstances, and I had just probed them with just a few questions that so intrigued the elder. He knew I knew my Bible. He knew I considered myself a Christian, but he was so intrigued, and I think God used that so that he ended up requesting that I come to the meetings, even though I wasn't studying. And I refused to study at that point, because when you study, they take you through chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. You can't jump to chapter 11 with your questions. You have to go through their nice little section of questions at each point along the way. And if you don't accept their doctrine at that point, chapter 3, we got stuck on the Trinity. So, well, there goes my chance to talk to them anymore, because they won't talk to me. And I knew that. I'd been through those studies enough to know that I don't dare do a book study at this point. But yet I really felt impressed on God because of the way he worked this out, that I could be down there. He had a plan to use me down there, and he also had a plan to teach me something. Because until you've walked in their shoes, you really can't identify with what it's like to be a Jehovah's Witness. And honestly, I was never baptized. So I had only had book knowledge at that point. And so I was praying, okay, Lord, I want to be used of you. I went down there, and they were studying Daniel's prophecy book, 1999. Those of you who are still in at that point will remember that goes through the Watchtower chronology for 1914. And they set it up based on the 607 date for the fall of Jerusalem. Well, I had my study Bible with me as we were going through this. Well, my study Bible notes stated that the fall of Jerusalem was in 587. And yet they have a date 20 years apart, 20 years later. So how are you going to reconcile this? Well, I got a hold of Carl Olaf Johnson's book, which I did not show them, but I studied his Gentile Times Reconsidered, and he goes through the cuneiform tablets of the Babylonian era and presents irrefutable evidence for the 587 date over the 607 date. And I didn't want to show them that book, but what I did do is, I'm using the interlibrary loan, I was able to gather books from around the world, the actual source material that the Watchtower quoted in their publications for to try to support the parts of the dates that they could support. They would quote these, Neo-Babylonian chronological series, these books that had the actual plates and the translation. So I got all of that, and I drug them to the Kingdom Hall. And I would sit down there, and they're going through their little Daniel's prophecy book, and they'd ask a question. I'd raise my hand, and I'd give them answers out of these books that I was researching. And I'd have witnesses after the meetings come up and say, "Where did you get that? That's really fascinating what you shared." It was like new light added to their light. And I'm like, well, I'm researching this, and I wouldn't tell them a whole lot, but I said, I've been researching it, and I got that out of Josephus, Historia book, or out of the Neo-Babylonian, whatever. And and actually the witnesses were kind of enjoying my comments. At least that was the impression I got, unless they wanted to make a good impression. But, and the elder, most of the time when he would ask questions, I didn't contradict, except there were a couple times when I did. But I really tried to play that very low key, and any issues that I had with them, I dealt with one-on-one with the elder and his wife, so that they could trust that I wasn't doing anything underhanded behind their back. Well, as I was researching this took a summer, and I compiled photocopies of these original translations of the tablets. No joke, I have a 4-inch notebook at home of all of the documentation. And then I thought, well, I can't present all this to the elder and his wife. I mean, they're never going to sit through 5 hours of presentation. So I actually streamlined it down to about an inch thick pile of papers, and I baited them. I didn't tell them I got evidence against 1914. I didn't do that. I just kept asking them to photocopy pages in the Insight book that dealt with their dates. and I had them photocopy this page and that page, and it was so funny because this is before they had somebody manage the library. I could just go in. It was great. So I'd go in and I'd grab these books off the shelf and I'd be reading, and then I'd have so-and-so copy a page, and I'd hear the elder talk to that so-and-so, what did she have you copy now? And they'd come into the library and kind of see what I have the books, but I didn't tell them what I was actually looking at. And one time his wife kind of cornered, well, what are you researching? I'm just researching 1914. About what? Well, I'm researching the actual books that they quote here in this publication. And I showed her this, and I showed her one little piece of it that dealt with even the point is amazing. When I did this research, I was researching the biblical scripture too, and I was finding dates in, this king, left from this point in where he lived, and he went down to conquer this land, and it took so many months, and in the Bible it would talk about this king conquered this king in such and such a time, and it was all there in the chronological plates that I was looking at. I'm like, this is cool. This verifies the Bible. I showed this to his wife, and I just showed them enough stuff that they were like, wow, this is interesting. And they were just wanting to know what it was I was coming up with. So finally, we got down after it was almost a year that I had been there, and I said, well, I completed my research, and I've got some questions for you. Would it be okay if we set up a time for 2 hours where I can come over to your house and we can research? And you can look at some of the questions that I have. And they said, sure. Well, the first time I showed up at the house, David the elder wasn't there. His wife's father was there, who had been an elder for 37 years. And I'm going, this isn't the elder I wanted to talk to, because a lot of elders don't put up with it. And I think they were suspicious. So they had somebody else come, and so all I did was just, played very loose, asked some questions, let him go on his little spiel, and he was going to nail me down to the wall and see if I was going to be a Jehovah's Witness or not, and I wasn't going to play his game. So I just let him teach me whatever he wanted to talk. He wanted to talk about the kingdom. I said, great, tell me all about the kingdom. And we spent the full 2 hours going over what he wanted to talk about. And then later on, afterward, I said to the wife, I really wish that, we could talk about what we wanted to talk about with, her husband there, and I didn't want to meet with somebody else. I said, I just felt uncomfortable. And she said, okay. So the next week, the elder that I was talking to was there, and I got to present this. And we got into about an hour. And what I did is I took the actual historical documents for the Neo-Babylonian era. What they would do is they would say, King such and such, when he, in his 43rd reign, like Nebuchadnezzar, in the 43rd reign of King Nebuchadnezzar, we bought this slave, or whatever the case may be. We did this monetary transaction. And for 3 years, we such and such did such and such. And in the 2nd year of evil Merodach, we such and such. Well, what happened is you have a statement right there. 3 years. The 43rd reign of King Nebuchadnezzar and the 2nd year of evil Merodach. Well, you know that you can't add 20 years in between the end of Nebuchadnezzar and the 2nd reign of evil Merodach. And then you do the same thing through all of the kings for that date range for the Neo-Babylonian era. And I did that all the way down to the fall of Babylon, 539. I found documents for everything, the transactions. And I said to them, this is my problem. If we're to add 20 years in here, it would mess up the chronological system for the economic system of Babylon. So you can't add 20 years in here, or it would have messed up their system. So they had no reason to be hiding 20 years for a king, which is a lot of times the excuse that they give. Well, the elder and his wife looked at each other, and they looked at me, and they said, are you questioning the governing body? They said, they're twice your age. And then they got to thinking, wait a minute, they're 3 times your age, because I was 20 at the time. So they said, you're questioning them? I says, I'm just saying I've got this evidence I have a little problem with. I says, if I'm to become one of Jehovah's Witnesses, would I have to believe something that I know is false and teach that to other people? And they said, well, yeah, you would have to do that. I'm like, well, what am I going to do?